I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co, and today I have 5 first impression reviews for you. I'm going to be giving you brief thoughts on these 5 games. In some of these cases, in 3 of these cases, I've actually played the game several times, but in all cases I don't feel I've played the game enough yet, and so they're going to be here as my 5 first impression reviews. I will be giving scores to the games, although of course, being first impressions, take them with a little grain of salt. Some of them could use a bit more time or a bit more plays to fully flesh that out, but we'll be giving you thoughts on Stalk Exchange from the Op, Detective Club from Blue Orange, Tree Society from Next Move Games, Ancient Terrible Things Reawaken from Pleasant Company Games, and then Borderlands, Mr. Torque's Arena of Badassery from Monster Fight Club and Gearbox Entertainment. That's a bunch of a name over there. I will be going through these as usual in order of my lowest ranked to my highest ranked, but let's go ahead and start off with Stalk Exchange from the Op. Now, Stalk Exchange over here, this is a kind of stock-taking game, sort of. You're trying to bet on the futures of how things are going to be playing out. You see, what you're doing in this game is you are gathering these various flowers, these bulbs from the market, and place them down into your own personal board over here, trying to flip them as you place things. I'll be giving you general how-to, not going into specific details, but the main thing you're being mindful of is as you gather things, you're altering the actual value on the market itself. You're ultimately trying to manage the placement of these bulbs, as well as what bulbs you'll have left by the end of the game before you get to the scoring, being very careful of the fact that the one that scores the most, the highest value bulb, effectively the market is going to crash on that. So there's a little bit of chasing the things that are the most valuable, being mindful not to be left holding the bag with the thing that was, the market crashes on, and trying to get as many points as possible. Ultimately, it's a good game. Stock Exchange, to me, there's nothing wrong with what the game does, but visually the game doesn't pull me in, and there's a lot of games that have done stock market manipulation better in a whole bunch of different ways. I think this is a totally fine game with a palatable approach, a very short rulebook. If you want to, I think the rulebook is like 3-4 pages. It's really not long at all, so it is accessible to dive into. Handles player counts decently, but again, I think it does everything fine. It does everything good. Nothing about the game impressed me. Nothing about the game was particularly bad. It's just a passably good game that if you're particularly interested in the flower theme, it might pull you in. If you want a easy to teach, easy to learn game in the genre, it might pull you in. But nothing about the game past those elements kind of shun for me. For me, it's a 3 out of 5. I had fun, but I won't miss it. Moving up from there, we have Tree Society over here. Tree Society from Next Move. Now, this is an interesting one because this is one I've played a few times, and it really does change. My opinion changes from my first play to my second play. So, this is one where you want how to start. Okay, Tree Society. Let's talk about how you play Tree Society. The general idea is you're going to be selling fruit. You can actually go through a 3-step turn over here where you're going to have these fruit cards on your personal display, and you're going to be selling fruits for the value of the collective amount of fruit around the table. So if you count the number of blueberries in play, and you sell a fruit for that much. There's a little bit of a timing mechanism of making sure you sell things that are on the table, that depletes what's on the table, but then you get to step 2 and you use the money you got from selling the fruit, as well as abilities. The fruit you sell also has an ability, and so you're choosing what gives you the money you want, as well as what gives you the ability you want, and then you go to step 2 where you start bidding into these guild cards. You see, the game comes with, I believe, 6 different sets of guilds. You're going to have 4 each game, and the guilds are going to be shuffled together, and they're going to be the cards you're trying to buy from the market. You're going to gather one of these guild cards, paying the cost for them, as well as upgrading existing guilds you have in play, again, paying the cost for those, and taking the abilities as you upgrade a guild. You see, a guild has 3 levels. The first level, which happens when you buy it, second level, and then the third level is just when you put it into your finished guild's display, which is also the end game trigger. The combination of balancing the fruit you sell, the ability on that fruit, the guilds you go for, the abilities on those guilds, because they have all kinds of abilities. Things that will give you points for the different types of guilds you have in your final display. Things that will give you points for concentrating on single guilds. Things that will give you, money for your things that will give you money for your unsold fruit cards that you have in your display. And so you're constantly trying to balance your points and the in-game economy as you buy and upgrade these guilds to try to come up with the best version of what you're doing. It is literally a 1, 2, 3 step turn. It's very fast moving. You sell a fruit, you go ahead and buy the guilds, you refresh everything up, rinse and repeat until game end is triggered. My first play of this was a lot of fun. It's a good game that has okay, I'm going to try to go for this guild and combine it with this ability. I don't know if it's doing anything new, but it's a good enough game that's easy to teach. Again, the rulebook itself is only 3 or 4 pages of actual rules. The game teaches pretty quickly, and the variety of the guilds and the powers and abilities kind of have you invested. But once you dive into it more more than once, I do think there's limited amount of decision space going on. It is, again, it's palatable, it does the job, it is accessible. I think that the components are nice, the cards are nice, a little light on the artwork, overall presentation is pretty good, and the fun of trying to mix and match your abilities is where the charm comes in, but I do think that that got worse and worse, not only but in subsequent games, but even as you're going through your first game, it becomes a little, I don't want to use the word predictable. I didn't think there's necessarily enough decision space or interesting things happening. The concept is good. Maybe an expansion pack with more guilds, with more abilities could make it better. As it is a good game. I enjoyed it. It will be a 3.5 out of 5. There's definitely some things that I really had fun with, but it's one that very quickly wore out its introductory pacing or whatnot. That's Tree Society from Next Move Games. Moving on from there, let's go ahead and go to Ancient Terrible Things. Ancient Terrible Things Reawakened is how to describe this. This is Yahtzee meets followers meets worker placement. I think it's a good mix of what's going on here. This is a re-implementation of the original Ancient Terrible Things, which I have not played that one. I've played this one, and this one basically it's worker placement Yahtzee. That's the main mechanic going on. Well, that and obviously Cthulhu and Ancient runs and all that. Basically, you're going to have a bunch of encounters on the board. Spots you go to on the board, and when you go to a spot, you're not actually seeing this over here, but when you go to a spot, you're going to get something as the leader bonus, and then everyone's going to get something as the follower bonus. But the reason you're going to the spot is actually to engage with the various encounters that are popping up that you're trying to take down, because that's what you're trying to do to ultimately score points. And to do so, you'll have to try to face off these encounters and roll your dice and get the results you need, maybe a 3, 4, 5 or 3 1s, whatever it is, to defeat the encounter. So what you're going to that location, you're rolling your pool of 5 dice, you're rolling 2 action dice as well, and then possibly using abilities to mix and match your dice pool or adjust things as you need. But you're going to then roll your dice at the location, and you can use tokens to get a whole bunch of things. There's going to be a whole token economy going in the game because you're trying to ultimately deal with the encounters, but everything else is trying to figure out how to get you all the tools you need to do so. You'll go to that location, you'll roll your dice, you'll do all the Yahtzee mechanisms to re-roll, to adjust, to figure out what it is, and then using your final dice pool to both deal with the encounter as well as getting extra tokens. The whole little trade-in aspect of different dice results can get in tokens, and you can divide up your dice pool to figure out what you want, while also using various cards and possibly action dice or discarding other things to go ahead and utilize and benefit from a variety of abilities. So ultimately, it's worker placement because you're going to those locations. You're going to those locations to defeat these encounters, and then you're rolling your dice pool and trying to use all your abilities at your disposal to actually go ahead and win the game and get all the encounters and the resources you need to rinse and repeat the cycle. Overall, the game is charming. It's charming. It's got good art, good production. There's a beautiful little dice tower in this version of the game. It's like a very thematic, strings lit up and all that stuff. Very cool presentation, lots of theme, but I think that it didn't necessarily do anything that was particularly, again, same problem with some of these games we're talking about today. There's nothing amazingly new here. This is Yahtzee, but I've played games that have better Yahtzee. It is worker placement, that I've played games that have better worker placement, and it's got a follower mechanic, and I've played games that have a better follower mechanic. This is similar to the other games we've talked about so far. It is reasonably accessible. The overall game is not that complicated. The experience is satisfying without being super rewarding. I think it's the kind of game you can get a few plays out of, but I don't think it has a ton of longevity to it. There's not enough interesting things going on here. If you're pulled into this because of the theme and the presentation, and that will keep it coming back to the table, then this is a good game to check out. If you're looking for best-in-class games in the genre, I just think there are better games out there. This is a good enough game with great art presentation and accessible enough that, again, I think you'll have fun with it. Another 3.5 out of 5. Moving on from there, we have Mr. Torque's Borderlands Arena of Badassery. This one over here is, we're going to have some of the same conversations we've had so far, but where games are. But the basic idea of Borderlands over here, this is a campaign-based game in which you're going to be controlling a bunch of characters from the Borderlands universe as you fight all the claptrap, robots, things, enemies, the whatever you call the various baddies in the Borderlands universe of the various types they have are going to be attacking you while you try to take them out and you try to roll better and utilize your different action dice. You can have different actions effectively that are in the game as far as trying to figure out the economy of when you're going to be taking a short range action, which dice you're going to be rolling, and trying to figure out your core actions that you're utilizing to try to figure out how to take down the enemies and accomplish the specific scenario you're going through. The scenarios are going to be a linked chain of scenarios where you have one, and then from there, if you succeed, you can go on to some of several, eventually culminating with the ultimate scenario and a boss fight at the end of it, although it very much is branching. I think there's like 12 scenarios if I'm not mistaken, but it is branching pathways, so you're not going to be experiencing all those scenarios as you go through this branching path and then take down the ultimate baddie at the end of it. There's a bunch of interesting things going on in the game. They're very heavy on all the various loot. There's character progression. You can be leveling up and building up your characters. There's going to be the reaction system. That's an aspect, I think, specifically from Monster Fight Club. They have their own reaction system that I think they've used in other games. I haven't played those. I've only played this one. But it's going to be a reaction system that effectively you can use your action tokens after enemies attack you. So if an enemy attacks you on the enemy turn, you can go ahead and use your actions. You and other players can use your actions to react to the enemy, which is actually a fun element of the game where someone lands a blow on you and suddenly you're able to react, fight back, adjust, whatever it is you need to do using this reaction system. So overall, everything about the game is fun. This is the problem with this one. The biggest problem I have with Borderlands is that there's a lot of this style of game that I have in my collection and a lot that I really enjoy a lot more. And this overall is a fun experience. I think Borderlands is a good dungeon crawler-esque experience with campaign mode, with character progression, with rolling dice and all the fun things that come with rolling a handful of dice and getting new gear. All of those things are present. The rulebook itself was not the best. I think the rulebook definitely had a bunch of issues as far as how I think it was overly complicated and not always as clear as I would like. Could have benefited from examples in a lot of places to make things hopefully clearer. There were some examples somewhere, but could have benefited from more. But overall, once you get past all that, there is a fun game that, especially if you are a Borderlands fan, I think this game will be very, very charming. I think that this is a good dungeon crawler, dice rolling game with mayhem and decision space. You are making decisions, you are finding gear, you are upgrading characters. If you like those things in games and you like the Borderlands IP, this game might deliver for you better than it did for me. For me, it's good. It is a good game, but I have games like Zombicide and Massive Darkness and Cthulhu Death May Die, and I don't even know the amount of games I have in this dice-rolling mayhem kind of genre that give me so many experiences, and this one, to me, there were elements that fell a little flat. Rulebook wasn't great. The tiles in the game, I find that the overall scenarios you're engaging on, that doesn't feel as much like, I kind of appreciate more of a room structure, open down a room, break open a door, things like that, as opposed to the kind of general wide openness. There are some tiles and whatnot, but generally you're facing off on this open terrain as enemies just run towards you and try to kill you, and then you utilize your own actions and of course the react system to survive. So again, kind of same situation as some of these others. It's a good game, it does a good job. This one does not have a 4-page rulebook, it has like a 30-page rulebook and like another 20-page scenario book, so there's a lot more to read up on, and the rules were definitely a little harder, so it's losing that. I think it is a good game for what it's trying to do, and if you are a Borderlands fan, I think it's definitely worth checking out. If you don't care enough about the IP, like I've played Borderlands, I like it, but I'm not attached to the IP. If you don't play enough of it, if you're not attached to the IP, I think there are better games that do this kind of thing compared to what this is doing. But it is fun. It is good. It's another 3.5 out of 5. And then lastly, in case you were bored of the 3.5 out of 5s, this one over here, Detective Club, is a 4 out of 5. This from Blue Orange Games is a combination of Dixit and like Chameleon, that kind of genre. The basic idea of Detective Club is you're going to be trying to obscure your identity. Which are you the hidden person in the room who doesn't know what's going on? So again, if you've played games like Hidden Artist Goes to New York or Chameleon or Spy Club, if you played any of these games that have that aspect where you're trying to blend in, the other players at the table only know their own role. So I know whether I am or am not the person who doesn't have the information. But then from there it follows a Dixit role. You see, you have all these cards over here, and players will have the opportunity to kind of have something. The leader, so to speak, is going to list something, and all the players have to follow. But the way the leader lists something is they might say something like buttons. Okay, in fact, is buttons a good one? Buttons is great. Buttons is great. Okay, here we go. I want to actually, ironically, I don't know what the card here is. Buttons would work well with this. So let's say I'm the leader and I say buttons, and then we all submit our cards. The problem is, when I say buttons, I didn't say buttons out loud. I wrote on a bunch of pieces of paper the word buttons, handed it out to the table, but one person got a blank sheet of paper, so they don't know what the word is. So what I do is, the other players, and then you shuffle it all up, you divvy it up, and then players start revealing their cards. So let's say I'm player 1, I go ahead and play this card over here. Player 2 plays this card, and then player 3 plays this card. And the problem is, right now, for example, I don't know what the word is or not, but if I'm the player who doesn't know what's going on, I may have noticed that there's like buttons here. This seems to be buttons, so I'll play this yarn card because I can justify that as being button adjacent or whatnot, and then players continue playing until all the cards are on the table. Now, as you start, once all the cards are revealed, the player starts saying why they played a card. So if I'm like, someone who knows that was buttons, all I have to do is point at my card and be like, yeah, the pillow has buttons. I thought that would be a good fit for a card for buttons. I thought that would be a good fit for buttons, obviously. The next player says the same thing, and us players at this point, the person who doesn't know what's going on, at this point they're starting to figure out, not starting to, they are now told what the word was, but they kind of have to, in hindsight, in combination with seeing other cards and being able to play their own card, combined with then trying to go ahead and justify why they played what they did, they have to come up with, yeah, I played this card because maybe it had buttons. Maybe it's something, maybe you're like, I didn't have any buttons in my hand, but I played this card because it's adjacent to buttons. So you're often going to be trying to justify why the card you played may not have been perfectly related to the card they needed, but it was the closest thing you had because of this logic train, but you're doing so based off of knowing after the fact while having clues before the fact. And that might sound too hard, but you have to remember, not everyone's going to have cards with buttons in their hand, which means there are often several players who do know the word buttons who are doing that exact same thing. They're like, yeah, I didn't have any buttons, but I played this moon because it's a round thing. It's the closest thing I had to something round, so I figured, this will hint that I know what the word is. So again, it has this funny aspect of all players will find themselves in situations of trying to justify their play. Some will be doing so because they didn't have a good matching card, and some will be doing so because they didn't know what the matching cards were. But ultimately, it results in a tremendously good time. The one caveat around this is you do need 4 players to play the game, which does make it a little harder to table. I mean, it depends on your player group and whatnot. And then outside of that, it's a question of you kind of want a hybrid of both parties. You want the person who's comfortable with party games and the person who's comfortable with the stress of trying to make things up on the spot, which isn't for everyone. Not everyone likes the sense of dread of like, I have to hide, I have to come up with a good story so no one knows who I am. And so you do need to have a larger player group, a relatively large player group. Again, 4 is not crazy. I think it's 4 to 8 if I'm not mistaken, 4 to 8 players. And then you do need to have players who are going to enjoy that genre of hiding themselves, which again won't be for everyone. But that's what we have over here. And this, like I said already at the beginning, is a 4 out of 5. And so that's what we have over here. We have 5 first impressions reviews over here. Stalk Exchange is going to be a 3 out of 5. Tree Society, Borderlands, and Ancient Terrible Things are all 3.5 out of 5s. They're all good. They're all fun. I've enjoyed them, but they didn't necessarily. I just think there's better games out there, but they're all enjoyable games that I've had fun with. And then Detective Club is a 4 out of 5. Slightly harder for me to table, especially because I have Dixit, so I don't know how often it will get tabled, but when you do, it is a really, really good time. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you found this helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.